In this lecture, we will calculate the cash ratio for both Apple and Microsoft. On this slide, we will calculate the cash ratio for Apple. Before we get started, what is the cash ratio and why is it important? The cash ratio is a liquidity measure that shows us a company's ability to cover its short-term obligations using only its cash and near-cash liquid securities balance. A key point here is that when we compare this ratio to the current ratio that we saw earlier, we notice that the cash ratio is more conservative than other liquidity ratios. Why? This is because the cash ratio only considers the company's most liquid resources. So now, how is this ratio calculated? It's simply calculated by taking the total of the company's cash equivalents balance, and the current portion of its marketable securities, and dividing that sum by the current liabilities on the balance sheet. Now for Apple, they had cash and cash equivalents of $38 billion at year-end. They then had current portion of their marketable securities of $52.9 billion. And then on the bottom part of the balance sheet, they had current liabilities of $105.4 billion. When we do the math, we come up with a cash ratio of 0.86. Now I'm interested to see how does this compare to Microsoft. So now let's calculate this for Microsoft using the same formula. We'll take cash equivalents, and the marketable securities or short-term investments. We'll take the sum of that and divide it by Microsoft's current liabilities. First, we have cash and cash equivalents of $13.6 billion. And then we have a short-term investments balance or marketable securities balance of $122.9 billion. On the bottom part of the balance sheet, we have Microsoft's current liabilities, which closed at $72.3 billion. And when we take all of this, we calculate a cash ratio of 1.89% for Microsoft. So what does this mean and how does it compare to Apple? Well, this tells us that Microsoft has $1.89 of liquid resources to cover every $1 of current liabilities. In other words, Microsoft has more than sufficient cash and short-term investments to cover all of its current liabilities on its balance sheet. Overall, when we compare Microsoft to Apple, we can see that Microsoft has a much healthier cash ratio than Apple. Stepping back and focusing on the big picture, on this basis, Microsoft would have an advantage in terms of its cash ratio as compared to what we saw in Apple in the earlier slide.